The economic costs of climate change are going to be large, much higher than they used to be. Compared to 20 years ago when we were doing the Stern Review, we're quite often seeing numbers that are over in excess of 10% of GDP, up to 50% of GDP in some countries. We see greater relative economic costs in Asia and the Pacific and in Africa. I think this is crystallizing into an economic and financial risk, not just an environmental risk. If we're adapting to a 4-degree world, we're going to have to spend far more money than if we're adapting to a 2-degree world. Even if we get close to achieving the 2-degree target, let alone progress to 1.5, we're pretty much certain that the only way we can reduce those impacts over the next 20 years are with adaptation. So we need to scale up. And when we're scaling up, of course, the key question is, how much do we need? We estimate about $200 to $400 billion a year this decade. About 50% to as much as 2/3 of those costs are in Asia. We have high hazards in Asia. We have a high population and high exposure. Okay, we know how much we want. How much do we have? We estimate that the flows of adaptation to developing countries are around 28 billion. Let's say 30 billion. That's still a lot of money, but it's not enough. We're going in the right direction, but we're not going at the speed and the rate that we need. One of the things that we do observe, and I think this is really important, is the adaptation finance flows are not flowing equally to all countries. And I think this is where we do have to take some recognition of the negotiation success. In relative terms, more adaptation finance is flowing to the least developed countries and the SIDS. So that's a really positive message, is that we're recognizing those countries have higher vulnerability and more adaptation is flowing towards them. That said, those countries often have the highest adaptation finance needs. If you're a small island developing state, the needs are really high. So even though flows are greater to you, you still have a large adaptation finance gap. But I think we should acknowledge the positive programming towards countries. What we're going to do in AGR 24, which we've never done before, is look at mountainous developing countries. I have to be honest, the story is not quite so positive. So the flows seem to be fairly similar to the average. And that's really important, because I believe that we really need to recognize mountainous developing countries as a highly vulnerable ecosystem, and we should be diverting more adaptation finance flows to them. And I think there is now a recognition in the negotiations that that's important. How do we bridge the gap? There is no magic silver bullet, sadly. We need a mixture of everything. So we are going to need to scale up public international finance way beyond the Glasgow level. We're going to need domestic public finance. We need to scale up the role of the private sector. This means we need to throw absolutely everything at it. The key question that we're starting to ask is who pays, whether it's concessional sovereign loans or on lending or private sector facilities. We're still asking those in developing countries to spend more money on adaptation than they are at the moment. They're still going to bear a large proportion of the cost. They do get access to concessionary finance, but ultimately they will be paying more than they were in a counterfactual because of climate change. And the question is that really fair and equitable